Well, Julia, thank you so much for joining me on the You're Not Alone podcast today. I was this whole week kind of listening to episodes and doing research and getting really excited about bringing you onto the show. Obviously, we've been friends for years through an introduction with a mutual friend, so big shout out to her. And of course, I know we were talking about this before I hit record, but we have to let the audience know that there's a huge congratulations in order on the wedding. So congratulations there. Yeah. Kate and I were talking about you and Dustin. We just thought the wedding looked beautiful. Loved the color schemes. Come on, the color schemes are so important. Everything just looked really, really great. And I was refreshed on your love story with Dustin when I was listening to said other podcast interviews. And I just feel like, and I felt like this when we went and grabbed dinner the other day, just that it's a good, you two have a good thing going. And it's almost that like meant to be type of deal. But I'm rambling, as you and I talked about right before this episode, how maybe we both have a tendency to do that. But I want to give you the floor just to kind of give my audience a quick introduction on yourself.
Sure. Well, first of all, thank you so much for having me on the podcast. I was so excited when you said you were launching a podcast because I feel like your message is so important. And to have more of these conversations just helps with our shared mission of mental health awareness and destigmatizing mental health, and also just hearing people's stories. There's something so powerful about having these conversations. And so thank you for giving me the opportunity to talk to your audience today. But yeah, for anyone that doesn't know me, I grew up in Pittsburgh. I moved to LA. Let's see, when was it now? It was back in 2016. No, 2018.
I think it was
oh my gosh,
it was 18.
It was 18.
I
Yeah,
remember our phone call. You were getting ready to leave your corporate job and move out and start a business. And I was freaking jealous. I was hyped for you, but I was jealous because I wanted to start my business, but we were at a point, my wife and I were at a point where it just didn't feel like it was time yet. So I was super excited for you. And I was like, God, I want to be able to do that too.
Yeah.
So anyways, not to cut you off in your story, but that was just, I remember that phone call really well.
Yeah, no, something changed in me, during those years. Like I got out of my contract with my company, and I was like, my life, I just started making decisions based on what I'm really listening to my gut and what felt right, where, as someone who, again, like I was diagnosed with anxiety disorder and depression from a young age. And a lot of times when you get a diagnosis like that, it feels like a jail sentence. Like, like, how am I going to make these decisions in my life? And, I have to be thinking about all of these things. And so, I just started making those decisions that I was like, I have one life to live. I got to live it. But yeah, going along with that, just having my story really starts with my diagnosis as a young kid, but I had all these symptoms of anxiety and depression, but suffered in silence. I didn't want anyone to know what I was going through. I felt like it was a personal weakness, something I had to deal with on my own. I was extremely embarrassed about it. And a lot of that came out of guilt because I grew up, I had everything but the white picket fence because no one in my neighborhood had fences. Like, I had everything. I had 2 loving parents, 2 older brothers, tons of friends. I was captain of the volleyball team. I was excelling academically. I was, one of the valedictorians in my high school graduating class. Like I was studying, I went on to college to study chemical engineering. Everything was like on the outside was going right. And so I was like, I can't break this vision that other people have of me, that I'm actually, like in my head, telling myself constantly thoughts of, you're not good enough. Nothing you ever do will be good enough. You don't deserve to get help because nothing in your life has ever been bad enough. And so that cycle just continued until I had this giant crisis in my life. And, on April 7th, 2014, my brother Justin, who was a year and a half older than me, died by suicide that day.
Yeah.
And that that day and that situation, I like to say it woke me up to this realization that if I didn't receive help for myself, I was definitely on the same path as he was. And to come to that realization was so frightening, in addition to all the grief that I was experiencing, losing my best friend.
Yep.
So I went on this huge mental health journey where first and foremost got the help that I finally needed for myself, with professional treatment, started speaking more openly about my own mental health conditions, because my family didn't hide the fact that that my brother died by suicide. So it created a lot of conversation around, hey, I'm struggling too, or I've struggled with these things, or I know someone that's struggling. And that's really where the journey began.
Yeah, definitely. And there are so many episodes out there for those of you that want to dig deep into that story, because one thing that came to mind, right, when I was listening to these episodes is there sort of a reliving of trauma every time you have to tell that story? Have you thought about that?
So I've been talking about my brother's death for 8 years, and it is very interesting that, like, over time, it's never easier to talk about it, but I've developed sort of like, I feel like an internal block when I say certain versions of the story.
Yeah.
But as you know, like, I've started ramping up my speaking career, and I went back to my high school
I saw this
about a month ago. Yeah. And that experience was extremely traumatic, because I was preparing what I was going to say, walking back into the high school that I graduated from. Luckily, it was they built a new building.
Yeah.
So I actually wasn't even going into the same building that I went to high school in, but
yeah,
like reliving that experience and kind of putting together a speech that felt emotional enough to reach the hearts of these students, so that
yes.
so it created change, but not enough so that it traumatized them, because you want to be very careful when you're speaking about these things, right?
Yeah.
That experience, I was hurting a lot trying to put that together. And then I did the speech for my parents the day before, and I could not get through it without crying. Like, I had to restart 5 or 6 times, because just saying it to my parents, it was just so hard. Even though they know all this, like, nothing was a surprise.
Yeah.
It was just so hard to relive that sometimes.
That was like the first thing that came to mind, because I was listening to episode after episode, interview after interview, and people, yeah, again, like I said, there are I don't want to go down that path right now, because you've told that story a lot, and it is a very powerful story and very important, but I couldn't help but feel like, gee, as you're one of my friends, so I just felt like, gosh, I wonder how much of this is like, do we sometimes get trapped in our trauma and of telling these stories and not even realize it? Because for me, like, you know, I think the first time that people hear my story, it's very gut-wrenching for them. I've told this story hundreds of times now. Do I still remember how I felt at a deep level? I'll never forget. But I think that it's the trauma that I felt from the onset of my OCD-like symptoms. It's not as intense as it used to be. So I was just curious about that.
Yeah. The other thing is, when we talk about, I know we're going to talk about like what we've learned in therapy, and something that helped me prepare for talking about this so much was something I learned in therapy, where to almost like separate myself from the girl telling the story. So like, I'm telling a story about someone else, and in that moment when I have to speak about it, I'm almost talking as if it wasn't me. And the only reason I can do that, Zach, is because of how far I've come in my own personal mental health. Like, if I was in the space that I was before my brother died, and even in those like 2 years after he died, I never would be able to do what I'm doing now. But because I've had so much help and come so far in my recovery, that's the only reason why I'm able to talk about it.
Yes. And that was one thing I did want to touch on, is like, you, and it's the same for me, you openly talk about the stigma that you had towards your own mental health, which is like so fascinating to me, that the brain, like, there's all these different parts of the brain, and where the depression and anxiety is coming from is not the same part of the brain that's like observing what's going on and being like, this is good or this is bad, or we should address this or we shouldn't. And for you, like, you were more of like I'm going to keep this to myself type of person. I'm ashamed of feeling this. I feel guilty. I shouldn't be feeling these emotions. Other people have it worse than I do. And that held you back in terms of your recovery process. What I garnered from, and we've talked a lot about our stories. So just for the listener, real quickly, I mean, how important is it to overcome the shame, guilt barrier that holds so many people back?
Oh my gosh, it's everything. I mean, if you don't believe it yourself, believe me that you are worthy of receiving the help, regardless of your situation. And you have to remember that pain is subjective to the person. And so what you might feel as super painful and difficult comparatively might not feel as painful to the next person, but you're never going to, like, that person's never going to know your pain and vice versa.
Right.
And so you can't, this comparison trap, it's never great. And, there's so many reasons that I say, you should unsilence your pain. One, because your pain is worthy of my time and other people. So,
Right.
you're allowed to talk about your pain openly to professionals or to your friends or whatnot. But it is so important to get over that internal stigma. And it's hard to even describe the importance of it, because when you're in that situation, you feel like, okay, I can hear this all day, but until you truly believe that for yourself, it's like really hard to get over that sometimes.
Gosh, you're so right. You're so right. And I think it starts by, and you're a scientist, so you'll appreciate this. It starts by looking at it like it's a medical condition. Yeah. You would never walk around with a broken bone and be like, I don't deserve to heal this.
Yeah.
People have to understand that there are regions in the brain that are being impacted by multiple factors that can create these symptoms. There's a genetic component. There are external factors like significant events, daily stresses of life. I talk about this in my programming, and it's a medical condition, and you can fix it. You deserve to heal. And you touched on a few things. Loved the advice about separating yourself from your message, seeing a girl up on stage giving a speech. I do the same thing, right? And we've talked about this too, the guilt that comes with owning a business, and entrepreneurship can be a 24/7 thing that actually leads nowhere good. I think the people that, think that you need, I mean, granted, look, it's business. I mean, you have to put in time, to get results, but to what extent? And what I oftentimes do is I'll close my eyes, I'll take myself out of my body, and I'll observe, like, okay, these are the things that you've done over the last 4 months. If you were observing somebody else doing that, what would you think about them? So I love that you brought that up, because I think that exercise is so important. It gets you to see yourself for who you actually are versus the narratives that you tell yourself over and over again. So I just thought that was a really, really nice piece of advice that you provided.
Yeah. And something that I've also practiced, and whether you're an entrepreneur or you're just a regular person that does whatever corporate job, something that has really had a profound impact on me, and in this same vein, is doing a win of the week exercise, where like every week you write down something like a win for you. And then when you go back at the end of the month, you can look back at everything you've done. Because as an entrepreneur, as someone, even when I worked in corporate, like, you don't realize everything you're accomplishing throughout the month, because you're just going about your day, and the bar keeps getting higher and higher, because once you've accomplished the goal, you just set the new bar.
Yes.
So taking time to actually like reflect on what went well, and then you're like, oh my gosh, I actually did a lot, and so I should celebrate that. But if you're never taking those moments to look back and reflect, then how could you realize what you've done?
Absolutely, which is a component of, so there's awareness there, and then there's gratitude, which I know it was one of the 6 pillars of mental wellness. So I want to touch on that. So your brother dies by suicide, very upsetting, but this is the catalyst, right? So what happens next?
What happens next is I took about a year to simply recover, simply grieve him. I was diagnosed with acute PTSD from the experience. So I was so traumatized that I couldn't even start grieving until I dealt with the symptoms of PTSD.
Yep.
And so that required medication, that required a lot of therapy, that required taking time off of work, that required just a lot of self-reflection. And once I was able to finally grieve, then of course the grieving process is long. And again, like you never stop grieving. You just learn to live with it. But yeah, so I started speaking more openly about what I was going through and just found this incredible response from people, either, saying they're struggling too, or asking me and my family for resources. And so what I did was I started interviewing people. I started interviewing mental health professionals.
Yep.
And I asked them, what are the things that you're recommending to people outside of professional treatment? Because we know how important professional treatment is, but you can't be with your therapist 24/7. And it's like, what are you recommending to people outside of therapy, and to supplement whatever their mental health journey looks like? And the crux of that came to like, how do you build mental resilience? Because whether you're diagnosed with a mental health condition or not, you're going to be thrown curveballs in life. Yes. And so it's, what are you doing every single day to prepare yourself so that when things get bad, you're not in crisis mode. Mm-hmm. You've built up this mental strength, as we call it. And so through these interviews with therapists, social workers, psychiatrists, psychologists, and then also I sat in Facebook groups. I sat in depression support groups, anxiety support groups, mental health support groups, and just read, what are people talking about? What are people suggesting to each other? What are people saying as things that help them? Yeah. And what I found is that there were 6 reoccurring themes. And those themes have now become our 6 pillars of mental wellness, which are mindfulness, gratitude, relaxation, sleep, nutrition, and fitness. And what we found is when you're tuning into each of those 6 things and you're incorporating them in either your daily or your weekly routine, you start to build mental resilience over time.
Yeah. And so I loved when I heard about this, because I think that it approaches the brain holistically. Like you said, we know, and for those tuning in right now that are on the fence about therapy, it works. I mean, it just does. Medication can absolutely play a big part in your recovery process. But then as you're tackling brain health, as I like to kind of call it, as a destigmatizing tool, you have to approach it holistically. And I just think the mindfulness and meditation it's exercise for your brain. The meditation is truly, I meditate for no more than 15 minutes a day, and it's completely changed my life. I think it's one of the biggest reasons why I've recovered to the place that I have. And so I love that was like pillar number 1. And that mindfulness, and what you said too, is like you respond now. You're way less reactive. And there was one episode that I was listening to where I just felt there was good dialogue going on, but gosh, how important is it to not be reactive in life and in society, where we're typing messages and we're sending emails and we're putting, in a lot of cases, maybe what's going on inside of us as the context onto the message, and then just popping off on somebody. But being mindful of how we feel, what makes us feel good, what makes us feel bad, what are the people in our lives that are showing up, and what kind of energy do they bring us? How do we feel after we leave those interactions with them? That's a bit of that mindfulness, at least for me. And then, the meditation, the gratitude, I love that. The one that stood out to me, though, the most, and I think that this is me projecting my own reality, was rest. Rest.
Sleep is so important. It's just, I can tell you right now, Zach, I did not get a good night's sleep yesterday, and I am feeling it today.
Me too.
It's like, and I just got this Aura ring, and so I can see on the app that I didn't get a good night's sleep. And so it just makes sense why I woke up feeling super anxious this morning.
Yep.
And I'm like, it's Friday. I'm like, I should be, happy and excited. I'm just did not sleep well, but most people think it's this time that you're not doing anything, when in reality, like, your brain is doing so much good work during that deep sleep time. It's taking out the trash in a
It
lot of
is.
senses.
Oh my gosh, it absolutely is. And there's a great book out there, Why We Sleep, and it's by Dr. Gosh, I don't want to butcher his name. It's right around here. It's either Michael or Matthew Walker. So to Dr. Walker, please
Dr. Walker.
Do not be upset with me. But it's just a fantastic book, and it really breaks down the science behind sleep. And I relate to you so much. So I track my sleep on my Apple Watch. The awareness around it, number one, is huge. You start to realize, okay, hey, there's so much going on behind the scenes, but that innocent glass of red wine, you quickly see, oh, wow, it took my heart rate from this to this when I slept last night, and it created this breakup, choppy pattern of sleep. This is why I feel groggy now. This is why my anxiety is higher. So it builds that awareness, and it makes you want to improve your sleep. So by the way, I feel you. I've been having a brain health week, as I like to call it. So it's Friday, but my Friday is going to look probably a little different from a lot of people's Fridays. I'm going to be chilling.
Yeah, I can't wait to just zen out tonight.
Oh yeah. We're zenning out. I love that. But even like, so sleep's great too, but even like rest, where we were talking about this, like on your little, we'll call it the condensed honeymoon, because there's a bigger one coming. Unplugging, like literally, I'm not responding to this email. I'm not responding to this text. I'm not responding to this, that, or the other. This task can wait. I'm going to lay on the couch. And rest looks different for everybody. But like, I don't think that we're resting enough in this society. I just don't think that that's happening.
Yeah, most people think like rest is just sleeping and laying on the couch, like you said, which is so important for some people. But I mean, for me, it's not. It was so hard for me, and it still is, for me to say, I'm not going to respond to this email, or I'm not going to respond to this notification on social media.
Mm-hmm.
So knowing myself, I literally had to turn all of my notifications off.
Yeah.
Like if it was coming up on my phone, having to make myself choose and say, I'm not going to respond to that, or I'm not going to read it and think about how I would respond, but then choose not to respond. Like I had to totally turn all of my notifications off. And I haven't done that in literally 3 years. And I can't tell you how great I felt afterwards. And I couldn't believe the difference that it made. Like just having them pop up, like instant anxiety. Like when I wake up in the morning, like if I have notifications, it's like instant anxiety.
It's the same for me. I've noticed I have this anxiety loop. I check texts, I check email, I check Instagram, I check book sales, and I just go in this loop of like checking it, making sure that I'm responding to clients, like on text and email, making sure that I'm responding to DMs and people reaching out and sharing their story. The book thing that's purely ego, I guess, but I just like get excited that the book is out there in the world. So that's a little self-serving.
I love your book. You should be excited about it. No, you should celebrate that.
I love the book too. I definitely do. But it's just funny about the anxiety. Even that, just those little repetitive actions pay such a toll. So I love the 6 pillars of mental wellness. And I know that you have a component of each one of the pillars, or you try to have a component of each one of the pillars in your Broglie boxes, which I want to talk about here in a second. And I know that we said 30 to 40 minutes. So I'm going to go for the 40. I'm going to try to get 8 more minutes out of you here. Perfectionism. Let's touch on that, because I think that there are so many people that get snagged. They get caught up and they want to do something perfectly, and so nothing gets done. Their beautiful screenplay sits there. Their beautiful business idea sits there. Their homework assignment sits there. The text that they wanted to send to their crush sits, blah, blah, blah. The list goes on. Yeah. What skills have you learned to address perfectionism?
I am a chronic perfectionist, so I love this topic. And like I said, I am a perfectionist in recovery, and I still sometimes fall back into that pattern because I'm not perfect.
Yep.
So I think first and foremost, just recognizing, having the awareness, I have these tendencies. I mean, it was to the point, Zach, where like I would have to reread an email 5 times before I would send it.
Mm-hmm.
And just thinking about like how much time you're wasting on that. And I think like a lot of that comes with this mindfulness exercise that ultimately like the perfectionism comes from anxiety. You're
Mm-hmm.
worried about what might happen if you do the action and it's not perfect.
Right.
And so having this exercise, I think, where it's like, okay, if I send this, what is the worst case, like in the email, for example,
Yep.
if I send this email, what is the worst case scenario if I don't read it 5 times over? There could be a typo, there could be
Mm-hmm.
whatever. Okay, that's the worst case scenario. What is the probability of that happening? Like, I don't know. The last time I sent a really big mess up email was like 10 years ago. So the probability is like 20%. Okay, now I can make a fact, like an actual like judgment call on I'm going to send this email without reading it 5 times.
Yep.
And or like, okay, if there is a typo, then like what is the worst thing that would happen if there's a typo? The person receives it, I realize I made a mistake, and then I say, oh, sorry, I made a mistake, like here's whatever. So I feel like just having this exercise of creating space between you and the action that you're going to do, which like is check the email 5 times over,
Yeah.
it provides a lot of value because you can be like, okay, like let me actually make a decision on this based on, let me choose how I'm going to react in this situation. And that would be like my first piece of advice, I guess.
Yeah, and I love that kind of that fact-based approach. And I think that it kind of helps frame things up. It also helps you identify like, okay, like I'm catastrophizing in some way. What is it that I'm so awareness, what am I catastrophizing about? And then, okay, now that I've identified like worst case scenario, I send an email with a typo. This is like for me, this person thinks I'm an idiot. They don't respond to me. We never do business together. I'm never able to impact the world in the way that I want to. Blah, 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 blah. And I'm like, okay, so one typo, one person that thinks I'm an idiot. Do they hold the keys to the mental health kingdom? Are they the only ones that are gonna, if this goes
Yep.
through, this is really gonna be the one?
Yeah.
No. And so I love that. I'm big on progress over perfection. So, and I've even incorporated process now. So it's like, if I do these 4 core things every single day, for my brain health, or for like I have processes for my brain health, for my business, for my relationship. If I just run these couple processes, and I think you'll appreciate this as a scientist, more than likely the outcome is going to be this. If it's not, we'll tweak the process. We'll try an experiment, as scientists like to do, and we will see what the outcome is, which outcomes are, fact-based. We're trying to find the facts. What are the facts? So my 2 cents on that too.
Like, no, I love that. And I also I read the lean startup several years ago when I started Broglie Box, but I'm rereading it now. And I think some of the lessons there apply to what we're speaking about, not just for like business owners or entrepreneurs, but anyone like doing anything. It's like the most successful people and the people that like you think are like they're launching these perfect products, or like the screenplay, for example, or having these perfect conversations with, someone that you like or whatever, want to date. It's like, you have to like go through this sort of like guess and check and testing phases to see. Yep. And so it's better to actually launch, in the case for like the entrepreneur, it's better to launch a product that is not fully done. It's not perfect, because if people are giving you feedback, then if it's good feedback, then you're on the right track. If they're making suggestions for things that you already had planned to do, then again, you're on the right track. And if they're not talking about things, if they're giving you bad feedback, then you haven't wasted a lot of time doing something that isn't going to be valuable.
Exactly.
So like launch the thing, do the thing, send the text, see what happens. And you can take that information and you can decide like, okay, I'm going to take this information. Maybe I do it differently the next time. But if you never do it, how much time are you wasting? And you look back and the years have flown by and
exactly. Yeah. And I have a phrase for that. I learn, I never lose. Meaning, the only way that I lose in life is if I take myself out of the game. Well, how do I take myself out of the game? Sitting with that screenplay for 15 years as it collects dust because it wasn't perfect. And, or, whatever, business, a love interest, whatever it might be. Instead, I always just learn. And that's exactly what you're talking about. I'm launching a product. Okay. is it reasonable to think that the first iteration of the product is going to be the exact thing that society wants? Or even with your own brain health, like, is that path to recovery really just going to be this perfect linear path? No, you're always learning.
And in the case with like the email, like holding the keys to the mental health kingdom, I love that. That's hilarious. But also, like, in the case of worst case scenarios, if you don't send that email, then you're back to the same. You also won't have any access to that person because you'll never know what they're going to say in response.
Exactly.
So it's like you're in the same place whether you act or not. So you might as well try, because you're probability wise, statistically going to, like, probably going to succeed further if you try, even if it takes, sending 100 emails or whatnot.
And I love that add on there too, which is like, so much of life is a numbers game. And the moment that you accept that and put the probabilities around it, the percentages, which I love, again, it's just numbers, it's just facts. I think the more that you can move things along. So you've obviously learned some of these mindsets in therapy. Do you know what type of talk therapy you've conducted in the past?
Yeah, CBT.
Okay.
Yeah, cognitive behavioral therapy for the most part.
Okay, perfect. So I wanted people to know that. And then I'm looking at the time. So cognitive behavioral therapy is a great place to start if you're looking to kind of jump in there and just understand. To me, it's like personal development. I mean, everything that you're sharing is like you're a more evolved human being than you were at the start of this journey. So
yeah,
there's
I
some
will
merit
say
there.
that, like, how some therapists do cognitive behavioral therapy and others, like it's very important that if you try this therapy, and we've talked about this before, Zach, like, if you don't click with your therapist the first time, like, try again with another therapist, because I had to go through like 4 different therapists until I found one that really resonated with me. And what I liked that he did, in addition to cognitive behavioral therapy as a methodology, is he was very scientific approach. Like, he approached it very scientifically, where there would be an issue and he would be able to explain to me in a textbook definition, this is why you're experiencing this thing. And that was really important for me as someone who had a lot of internal stigma on what, like, I shouldn't be feeling this way because nothing bad has happened to me. It's like, no, like, it's okay. This is your brain. And this is what the textbook says. Like, this is what science says. And that was really helpful for me in destigmatizing. But the point is, like, don't give up if you're like, oh, I tried CBT, but it didn't work for me. It's like, try it with a different therapist and you might have a completely different experience.
Yes, try it with a different therapist. And also maybe there's another talk therapy out there for you. And also consider your maturity level. Maybe when you first went to therapy, you were 18, you just weren't there in the right frame of mind. And now you're 22, 24, 30, maybe, and you're really ready. Maybe your commitment level is just higher. And that was always the X factor type of deal. Like, maybe you weren't ready to receive that information and that coaching. So, excellent point on finding that right fit. So as we kind of close things up here, can you explain Broglie Box and then what's the latest with Broglie Box?
Sure. So Broglie Box, we create care packages and kits for mental wellness and self-care. And like Zach said, all the products, tools, and resources stem from those 6 pillars of mental wellness. So we have pre-curated boxes on the website for different things. Like, we have one called Alleviate Anxiety. We have one called Wellness Warrior, one called Stress Less. We have a grief support box. But what's becoming increasingly popular is the Build Your Own. So people can go on and choose from our product directory of we have like 40 products now that people can choose from. And a lot of the time the box is sent as a gift. So we offer the option to put in a greeting card and we handwrite all of the messages, or you can send it to yourself. And there is an option on there where you can click, like, this is for myself, send me a nice message, and our team will write a message of encouragement to you.
I love that. And is it a handwritten letter, you said?
Yes.
That's beautiful. That is a wonderful touch. That's a cramping of the wrist.
I know. Sometimes, everyone's like, oh, like, my wrist hurts. I know it's a lot, but it's so worth it. And there's something about a handwritten note. It just makes such a difference.
Different. It hits so different. Yeah. It's anytime we get a handwritten note, Kate and I, we are just it's because it takes time and energy. So that's a beautiful thing. As we conclude, what is one piece of advice you would give someone who is right at the start of their mental health journey?
I would say never give up. If you're right at the beginning, it can feel like this massive undertaking and it can feel like you're not making progress. And like we said before, it's not linear. And as someone who has been on this journey and I'm in such a great place compared to where I was, 10 years ago, I still have bad days.
Me too.
Like we're human. And the point is though, is that those bad days, they definitely don't feel as bad as they used to. And I now have tools that I can reference for what to do to help myself feel better. But I think the biggest thing is just giving yourself grace that you're going to have these moments where things feel bad, but as long as you don't give up, because the world definitely needs you here.
The world needs you here. I think that's a beautiful way to end this. And absolutely never give up. Show yourself grace. The world needs you here. We want you here. So, Julia, thank you. As always, you're a dear friend of mine. Thank you for coming on to the show. Just sharing a little bit about Broglie Box, your story, some insights around perfectionism, the 6 pillars of mental wellness. And of course, you're going to be back on the show many times. There's going to be many life updates as we go. But yeah, thank you so much for your time.
Thank you.